Your brother deserves it. That was the last thing Dad said to me before handing my younger brother, Caleb, the keys to the kingdom, the lakeside estate, the cash, and the CEO title of Sterling Heritage. I walked out with nothing. Exactly 1 month later, my phone lit up with a text from Mom. No hello, no apology, just 3 words, mortgage is due. The audacity was almost impressive. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I simply typed back, ask your heir. Then I went back to work. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. My name is Willow, and for 32 years, I wasn't a daughter, I was the structural integrity of the Sterling Heritage furniture empire. Growing up in the shadow of that sprawling lakeside estate in Grand Rapids, Michigan, my life was defined by sawdust and silence. My father, Richard, was a man who believed the soul of furniture lived in the sweat of the factory floor, a place he deemed too rough for a girl. My brother, Caleb, 3 years younger, was different. He was the visionary, a title bestowed upon him not because he had vision, but because he had the audacity to dream loudly, while I worked quietly. While Caleb spent his teenage years networking at parties and crashing sports cars, I was in the back office, teaching myself supply chain logistics. I learned that a chair isn't just wood, it's 1,000 moving parts, from the sustainable timber in Oregon to the precise humidity control in the shipping containers. I became the architect of shadows, the invisible hand that kept the Sterling name synonymous with luxury, while the books bled red from Caleb's experiments. I streamlined our vendor contracts, cutting costs by 15% in my first year as director of operations. I digitized our inventory when Dad still wanted everything on paper. I saved us millions, silently, efficiently, without ever asking for applause. But silence, I learned, is a currency that depreciates quickly. The turning point came on a humid Tuesday evening in August. The family gathered for dinner in the main dining room, a space that felt less like a home and more like a boardroom with better catering. My mother, Susan, the consummate peacekeeper, fussed over the roast while Caleb scrolled on his phone, looking bored. Dad cleared his throat, the sound echoing off the mahogany walls. I've made a decision about the CEO position, he announced, not looking at me. It's time for new blood. Caleb, it's yours. The room went still. I set my fork down, carefully. Richard. My mother started. A weak protest dying on her lips. It has to be Caleb, Dad continued, his voice firm, final. He has the passion. He understands the soul of the craft. Willow. You're excellent at the clerical work, sweetheart. But sawdust? That's in the blood. And it's a man's world out there on the floor. Clerical work. 15 years of modernizing a dinosaur of a company, dismissed as filing papers. I looked at Caleb. He didn't look surprised. He looked relieved, like he'd just been handed the keys to a car he hadn't paid for. And in that moment, I understood the sunk cost of the golden child. My parents had invested so much of their identity into Caleb, their pride, their ego, their belief that the male heir was the only heir, that admitting he was incompetent would be admitting their own failure. They were doubling down on a bad investment, because the alternative was facing the bankruptcy of their own parenting. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply nodded. I understand, I said. If that's your decision. It is, Dad said, satisfied. We're transferring the estate title to him as well. For collateral on the expansion loans. That night, I went to my office. I didn't pack a box of memories. I packed my hard drive. I downloaded every vendor contact, every logistics algorithm I had built, every piece of intellectual property that I had personally developed and legally owned. Then, I drafted my resignation letter. It was 1 sentence long. Effective immediately, I resigned from all positions at Sterling Heritage. My parents thought I was just an employee they could discard. They didn't realize I was the structural integrity of the entire operation. They didn't know that for the last 5 years, I hadn't just been the supply chain director. I had been the silent investor. When Caleb's networking trips to Vegas turned into gambling debts that threatened to cut off our timber supply from Oregon, Dad didn't know. Mom didn't know. I was the one who intercepted the foreclosure notices on the warehouse. I was the one who used my personal savings, $850,000 of capital I'd earned through side consulting, to pay the vendors directly. I kept the lights on. I kept the black walnut moving. I kept the illusion alive because I thought I was investing in my future. I thought I was buying equity in my own legacy. But looking at that resignation letter, I realized I hadn't been buying equity. I had been paying a family tax, and the subscription had just been canceled. The next morning, I walked into the factory one last time. The smell of oak and iron usually grounded me, but today it smelled like decay. I placed my resignation on Dad's desk before he arrived. I didn't wait for a confrontation. I didn't want an exit interview. Then came the most satisfying part. I picked up the phone and called our primary timber supplier in Portland. "Cancel the standing orders," I said. "The personal guarantee from Willow Sterling is withdrawn effective immediately. All future shipments must be secured by Sterling Heritage Corporate Credit." "Willow, you know their corporate credit rating is junk," the supplier said. "Without your guarantee, we can't ship the wood." "I know," I said. "That's not my problem anymore." I walked out to my car, my phone already buzzing with vendor alerts that payments had failed. I drove away from the estate, the lake shimmering in the rearview mirror. I wasn't just leaving a job, I was leaving a burning building, and I had taken the only fire extinguisher with me. I felt a strange, cold lightness in my chest. It wasn't happiness. It was the absence of a burden I hadn't realized was crushing me. I was the silent investor no more. I was a free agent, and the market was about to correct itself. 2 years passed. In the silence of my absence, I built something new. I founded Ironwood Logistics, a supply chain consultancy specifically for high-end manufacturers. It turns out, the clerical work my father despised was the only thing keeping the industry alive. My business thrived. I bought a penthouse in downtown Grand Rapids, a space of glass and steel, far removed from the dusty, suffocating tradition of the Sterling estate. I made my first million within 18 months. Meanwhile, silence from the family was absolute, broken only by the occasional generic birthday text from Mom. But I kept tabs. I watched from a distance as Sterling Heritage began its slow, inevitable slide. The industry rumors were brutal. Caleb had fired the master craftsmen, claiming they were too expensive, and replaced them with cheap, unskilled labor. The quality plummeted. Returns skyrocketed. The Sterling guarantee became a joke in the trade. Then, the texts started. At first, they were subtle, "Thinking of you. From Mom, hope you're well." Then, the desperation began to bleed through. "Your father is so tired. Caleb is under so much pressure." Finally, the dam broke. "We need you to come home," Mom texted on a Tuesday afternoon. "Just to look at things, fix the mess. Family helps family." I sat in my office, looking at the message. Family helps family. The audacity was breathtaking. They had exiled me, stripped me of my legacy, and handed it to a boy who treated it like a toy. And now, when the toy was broken, they wanted the mechanic back. They refused to blame Caleb. It was the market, the economy, bad luck. Never him. I thought about the irony. Dad had dismissed my skills as soft, as if understanding the flow of goods was somehow less real than cutting wood. But here was the truth. You can have the best wood in the world, but if you can't get it to the factory, or get the finished chair to the customer, you don't have a business, you have a hobby. My soft skills were the iron spine of the operation, and without them, the hard manufacturing was collapsing under its own weight. I considered responding. I drafted a dozen replies in my head, listing every way they had failed me. But then, I stopped. I realized something profound. Anger is engagement. Arguing is validation. It tells them they still have power over your emotions. The opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. I didn't block them. I just didn't reply. I let the phone buzz on my desk while I reviewed a contract for a new client in Tokyo. I chose the peace of indifference. It wasn't cruelty, it was self-preservation. I wasn't punishing them. I was simply prioritizing my own peace over their chaos. I was no longer the daughter begging for a seat at the table. I was the CEO of my own table, and they didn't have a reservation. But the universe has a way of forcing a reckoning. A week later, my phone rang. It wasn't Mom. It was a number I recognized from my old life. The bank that held the original mortgage on the factory. A loan I had guaranteed years ago before I had the sense to untangle my finances. "Miss Sterling?" The loan officer's voice was grave. "We need to talk about the outstanding balance on the Sterling Heritage account. We're initiating foreclosure proceedings." "Foreclosure?" I asked, my voice steady, though my pulse quickened. "I thought the new loans covered that." "The new loans are in default, ma'am. All of them. The total outstanding debt is $6.5 million. $6.5 million. Caleb hadn't just run the company into the ground. He had drilled a hole to the center of the earth. "I see," I said. "Thank you for notifying me." I hung up and stared at the city skyline. This wasn't just a business failure. This was an extinction event. And I was still technically on the hook for a fraction of it. 10 minutes later, Mom called. I answered this time. "Willow?" Her voice was thin, trembling. "Did the bank call you?" "They did. We don't know what to do," she sobbed. "They're going to take the house. They're going to take everything." "Caleb. He says it's a misunderstanding, but the sheriff was here with papers." "It's not a misunderstanding, Mom. It's math." "Please," she begged. "Come home. Just talk to us. Your father. He's not doing well. We need a consultant, someone who knows the business. We can't pay you right now, but..." "I'm not coming as a consultant," I cut her off. "And I'm not coming as your daughter." "Then? I'll come," I said, my voice cold, precise. "But I'm bringing my lawyer, and we're not meeting at the house, we're meeting at the factory. Tomorrow morning, 9 sharp." "Your lawyer?" she whispered. "If you want to save the furniture, Susan, you don't call a carpenter, you call a shark." "See you at 9. I hung up. I wasn't going back to save them. I was going back to conduct a hostile takeover of a failing asset. I wasn't the prodigal daughter returning. I was the liquidation specialist. The next morning, the factory lot was empty. No trucks, no hum of machinery, just the wind rattling the corrugated metal siding. It looked like a tomb. My lawyer, David, a man who smiled with his teeth but never his eyes, parked his sedan next to my Porsche. We walked in together. My parents were sitting at the long conference table in the dusty showroom, surrounded by unsold, defective chairs. Dad looked shrunken, his old-world confidence evaporated. Mom looked terrified. Caleb was pacing, looking disheveled, still trying to project an air of authority that fit him like a cheap suit. "This is ridiculous," Caleb snapped as I entered. "Bringing a lawyer? We're family, Willow." "Sit down, Caleb," I said, not raising my voice. I took the seat at the head of the table, Dad's seat. He didn't protest. "We're here to audit the books," David announced, opening his briefcase, "to see if there is anything worth saving." "Of course there is," Dad sputtered, finding a spark of his old arrogance. "The Sterling name, the legacy, the designs. My father's chair designs are world famous." "Are they?" I asked. "Let's see the IP registrations." We spent the next 2 hours tearing through the financials. It was worse than I thought. The debt wasn't just operational losses. There were massive withdrawals, cash transfers to offshore accounts, payments to shady consultants. "Where did this money go, Caleb?" I asked, pointing to a transfer of $200,000. "Marketing," he mumbled. "Brand expansion. To a casino in Macau?" I raised an eyebrow. "Is that our new target demographic?" Dad put his head in his hands. Mom was weeping silently, but the real blow was yet to come. I turned to the intellectual property file. The folder was empty. "Where are the design patents?" I asked. "Grandfather's original sketches, the copyright to the Sterling Lounge." "Where are they?" Caleb stopped pacing. He went very still. We leveraged them," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Leveraged?" Dad looked up, confused. "What does that mean?" "I sold them," Caleb blurted out. "I had to. The debts. The guys I owed. They weren't banks, Dad. They were going to hurt me. I sold the rights to a manufacturing conglomerate in Vietnam. Just the older designs. I thought we could design new ones." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the sound of a legacy dying, You sold grandfather's designs? Dad whispered, his face turning a terrifying shade of gray. You sold the soul of this company to cover your gambling debts? I didn't have a choice, Caleb screamed, his voice cracking. I was drowning, and where were you, Willow? You left, you abandoned us. I was pushed out, I corrected him, my voice like ice. By a father who thought biology was a qualification for leadership. The company is dead, David said, closing the file. Without the IP, this is just a building full of sawdust. The debt exceeds the asset value by $4 million. There is nothing here. Mom looked up, her eyes red. But surely we can get them back? We can sue? Caleb made a mistake, but he was desperate. He didn't make a mistake, Mom, I said. He committed corporate suicide, and you watched him by the rope. No, Mom pleaded, reaching across the table to grab my hand. Her grip was desperate, damp with sweat. I pulled back, not violently, but with the precision of someone removing a weed from a garden. Willow, please. You have money. We know you do. Buy them back. Save us. Don't let your grandfather's legacy end like this. Why should I? I asked. The question hung in the dusty air, heavy and suffocating. You told me I wasn't a Sterling. You told me my work didn't matter. You told me sawdust was in the blood, and I didn't have the right blood type. Why should I spend my hard-earned capital to clean up the mess of your chosen heir? Because you're the only one who can, Dad said. His voice was cracked, broken. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. I was wrong. God help me, I was wrong. It wasn't about the sawdust. It was about the mind. You were the only one who ever understood the business, please. I looked at them, broken, bankrupt, desperate. It was the moment I had played out in my head 1,000 times, but now that it was here, I didn't feel triumph. I just felt a cold, professional clarity. You're right, I said. The company is worthless without the designs. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick document bound in blue leather. I slid it across the mahogany table. It made a heavy, authoritative sound. What is this? Dad asked, his hands trembling as he reached for it. That, I said, is the deed of ownership for the Sterling Design portfolio. They stared at me. Caleb stopped breathing. I knew Caleb would sell them, I said, my voice flat. I tracked his debts. I knew who he owed. When he put the IP on the market 3 weeks ago through a broker in Hong Kong, I was the buyer. I used a shell company. I bought grandfather's designs back for pennies on the dollar, because the buyers didn't know what they had. They thought they were buying sketches. I knew I was buying the crown jewels. You own them? Caleb whispered, horrified. I own them, I said. I own the Sterling Lounge. I own the Heritage Table. I own the name. I own the soul of this company. And right now, I'm the only reason the bank hasn't padlocked the doors, because I hold the collateral. So you saved us, Mom exhaled, a sob of relief escaping her chest. She slumped back in her chair. I saved the legacy, I corrected her. I didn't save you, I signaled David. He pulled out a new stack of contracts from his briefcase. The paper hit the table with a sharp slap. Here is the deal, I said. I am offering to acquire Sterling Heritage Furniture. I will assume the debt. I will pay off the reverse mortgage on the estate so you don't lose your home. Thank God, Dad breathed, closing his eyes. However, I continued, my voice sharpening. My terms are non-negotiable. 1. I take 60% controlling interest immediately. 2. Richard and Susan, you retire. Today. You will have no voting rights, no operational role. You go to Florida, and you stay there. 3. I turned to Caleb. You are fired, effective now. You are barred from the premises. If you step foot on this property again, I will have you arrested for trespassing. And frankly, given the fraudulent conveyance of the IP, you're lucky I'm not having you arrested right now. Caleb looked at Dad, waiting for the defense that always came. Dad? Dad looked at the blue leather binder in his hands, the proof of my competence and his son's betrayal. He didn't look up. Sign the papers, Caleb, Dad whispered. It's over. The ink didn't even smudge. My parents signed the transfer documents with the resignation of people who realized they had been betting on a losing horse for 30 years. There were no hugs, no tearful reconciliations, just the quiet shuffling of papers that transferred an empire from the bloodline to the bottom line. "Caleb," I said, looking at my brother. He was still staring at the door, as if waiting for a rescue that wasn't coming. "Security is waiting to escort you to your car. You have 5 minutes to clear your desk. Anything left behind becomes company property." He opened his mouth to argue, saw the look on Dad's face, a look of utter defeat, and closed it. He walked out, flanked by 2 guards. The golden child, finally tarnished. I walked out onto the factory floor. It was silent, dusty, smelling of neglect. I walked to the main breaker box on the south wall. I didn't hesitate. I threw the switch. The hum of electricity surged through the building. The high bay lights flickered, then blazed to life, illuminating the dormant machines. It wasn't a triumphant sound. It was the heavy, industrial groan of a heart being forced to beat again. I didn't feel joy. I felt the crushing, satisfying weight of responsibility. I was the CEO. And I had work to do. 12 months later, Sterling Heritage posted its highest quarterly profit in a decade. The debt was restructured. The Sterling Lounge was back in production, manufactured right here in Grand Rapids, not overseas. I sat in my grandfather's chair in the corner office. I hadn't inherited this seat. I hadn't been given it because of my last name or my gender. I had bought it. I had engineered it. And that brings me to you. To the outsiders. To the fixers. To the ones holding the family together from the shadows while someone else takes the credit. Stop waiting for permission. Stop waiting for them to wake up and realize your value. They won't. They are too invested in their own narrative to read yours. You are not a supporting character in their story. You are the protagonist of your own. If they won't give you a seat at the table, build your own table. If they lock the door, buy the building. True legacy isn't what you're given. It's what you build when everyone else has walked away. If you've ever had to buy back your own worth, hit that like button and share this story. Let's remind the world that competence is the only currency that matters.